In today's aviation news recap, I take a look at updates surrounding the Boeing 737 MAX grounding with compensation arriving. Next, there is developments at Air Canada. And finally, I turn to JetBlue, who are expanding their network towards Europe, with an interesting destination being added. Let's begin with arguably the headline story. Following significant groundings occurring at the top of the year, stemming from a door blowout incident and the obvious knock-on effects that were felt, Alaska Airlines has announced it received around USD 160 million from Boeing, essentially acting as compensation payments for the first quarter, as a response to the troubles felt by the major airline. We know they were hit hardest alongside United Airlines, and they've been trying to recover ever since. Additional compensation is expected to arrive at the airline in the future, but the amounts from this are yet to be determined. The airline said that the specific amount of 160 million actually came about to cover its losses in the first quarter. Alaska Airlines formally confirmed that its pre-tax profit dropped around USD 160 million in Q1, hence the cash amount paid to the airline being that figure. Developments surrounding the compensation did come following a filing that was published by Alaska Airlines dated April 4th, 2024. And if you're into all the legalities of it will be linked down below in the sources area for a bit of light reading. I'm joking, it is quite an in-depth filing, but feel free to have a look at it. While, like I said, further payments are expected, the airline did formally confirm that these will be confidential. We'll see if we hear more about that in the future. The airline went on to also announce that its losses in the first quarter came directly from its own inability to offer a robust service, which included, we know, many cancellations, delays, and other issues that stem from that. Additionally, the airline cites the substantial costs of restoring the grounded fleet that put the company in a bit of a tricky position, to say the least. 2024 has mainly been messier than expected for Alaska Airlines. When a door blowout incident occurred in the first week of the calendar year aboard one of their own aircraft, the fallout was a little bit hard to predict. Immediately, Alaska Airlines grounded its fleet of 737-9s, this being the impacted plane, as a precautionary measure. But upon preliminary inspections, the airline identified loose bolts in several other planes, and thus we did actually see a fallout commence. For several weeks, the aircraft crucial to Alaska Airlines' business and representing more than 20% of its active fleet were grounded, and its network was sent into disarray. While safety was obviously prioritized, the airline really did feel the effects during what is meant to be a busy holiday season, and by the time approval had formally arrived for the aircraft to re-enter service safely, this process is not something that can be completed overnight, so the staggered re-entry into service of units certainly helped Alaska, but also limited their own ability to recover as quick as they would have ideally wanted. While it remains unclear how compensation will be handed down to, say, other impacted airlines, more companies are no doubt now expected to seek some form of payment from Boeing. Payments may not necessarily relate to the groundings that occurred at the beginning of the year, but what may now creep into the picture is the persistent delays in acquiring new aircraft, and the ultimate impact on finances and a general business that is being felt. We know Boeing has been unable to deliver planes on time. That's not entirely been down to them. However, now with also customers' patience wearing thin on uncertified aircraft, it paints a pretty complicated matter. Let's move on to Air Canada, who are celebrating the launch of service towards Singapore from Vancouver, making actually for its newest Pacific route from the west coast, with the service coming in at 12,818 kilometers, or 7,965 miles. This is the longest flight the airline offers when strictly measured by distance. On top of that, the flight takes 16 hours and 5 minutes. Initially, the service will be offered 4 times weekly between the two cities, designated as AC-19 and AC-20. The carrier says departures from Vancouver will occur on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, with the next generation 7879 that has been selected for the service. Air Canada adds that Singapore's joining the network is crucial to its commitment to actually expanding its own presence in Vancouver. Labelled as a strategic plan, I know, so exciting, the aim is, as part of this plan, to add new cities from the Canadian location that we know is geographically positioned in an optimal manner to meet flights that are traveling across the Pacific, whether this stretches in Asia or the Oceania. Additionally, for those passengers traveling aboard the service to Singapore, they will have access to further onward connections, potentially as far as southern India or Southeast Asia, thanks to the Star Alliance codeshare partnership with Singapore. Air Canada, at least, continues to pursue further expansion into key markets. But see, there is one thing that remains a persistent roadblock, at least for now, that is aircraft availability. You may know that Melbourne has been viewed as an essential location for the airline for a considerable period, and it did fly here before the pandemic, but it has not returned. And while the airport, state, and airline are all keen on reinstating this, an announcement has yet to arrive. But as more aircraft arrive, the expectation is these routes will be made possible again, so stay tuned in the coming years, as no doubt we'll see more cities added to that Air Canada network as they look to capture more market share. Over to the final story in today's proceedings, and that's JetBlue, who are celebrating the launch of service between Boston and Paris, which represents a hugely important addition to its network. Service towards Paris has been a long time in the making, as the airline has sought to boost its transatlantic offering. It's been a market in recent years that it's really looked to dive into, feet first, with Amsterdam added and a seasonal service to Dublin complementing flights to London. JetBlue has always been very well aware that there are many choices when travelling from Boston to Paris and just generally Europe, but the hope is that with their service now arriving, they'll be able to take market share away and offer travellers an alternative choice. The Airbus A321LR is being deployed on this service with 24 Mint Suite seats and 114 economy class seats. The airspace cabin interior is labelled as spacious. The deployment of the A321LR on services such as those between Boston and Paris has really helped redefine what single-aisle travel can be, and obviously has passed previous limitations that were set. While as well we factor in the A321XLR's upcoming arrival also at JetBlue with a boosted range over the LR, these services will extend further than just say the western part of Europe, more into the deeper central and eastern locations. While there's obvious pushback from avid travellers who simply don't want to spend 9 hours on a single aisle plane, the benefits greatly outweigh the negatives for your airline customers. These efficient next generation aircraft harbour significant cost savings, and more often than not will allow these smaller aircraft to maybe reach new markets that wouldn't have been in consideration some 10 years ago. What do they also do? Ease pressure on existing wide-body aircraft that could be deployed to more in-demand routes that need the additional capacity desperately. It's going to be fascinating to see what the XLR brings to the industry when it launches, but I'd like to hear your take. Yes, you can share your thoughts on the previous two stories that I did cover, but if you made it this far in the video, are you a fan of these 9-hour marathon stints on a single-aisle plane? Or are you in the camp where you'd prefer flying a wide body purely for comfort and space? Or do you simply not care and are just after the cheapest ticket? Let me know down below in the comments. Thanks a lot for your support again here on the channel. Be sure to stay tuned, same place, same time tomorrow, for your latest industry recap.
And we'll fly.